Okay, welcome back everyone to WorkSmart Live. This is Files Everywhere. I'm Dawn Church. I'm WorkSmart's events manager. Thank you so much for being here, and a big thank you, as always, to our friends and client over at the Durham Chamber of Commerce for partnering with us again on this series to make all of this awesome content available to all of the local chamber members. And we, of course, have the fabulous Marissa Wayman back with us this week, who I believe has installed a personal generator under her desk.
Fingers crossed, no power issues this week. Hello, everyone.
Fingers are super crossed. Yeah, if you missed it last week, Marissa's entire neighborhood's power went out. And oddly, Verizon went down too, so she couldn't even hotspot back into the webinar. So it was a very sad Marissa-free webinar, but she's back with us here today, and I'm very, very, very grateful. So, so last week we talked about the bottleneck of email and how it's really just time to break up with email and see some other apps for communication and collaboration. This week, we're kind of almost extending that conversation, but we're really kind of focusing on the collaboration element, as opposed to last week where we were mostly talking about communication. So not knowing where to find files that you need can be a big bottleneck for productivity, right? I am a very hyper-organized person, so it drives me a little nuts when I have to when I have to hunt and search for files in order to be able to find them. But even past just search time, there's other problems with an unorganized, I'm having all sorts of trouble talking today apparently, with an unorganized virtual file structure. Maybe you have multiple versions of files floating around. Maybe you lose files because they were stored on your laptop instead of in the cloud. Maybe you spend too much time managing permissions when new team members come along or some people leave. So if we want to be forward-thinking organizations, which is the whole point of this Back to the Future series, we need to have forward-thinking virtual organization that includes picking the right tools for the right jobs, like we talked about last week with communication, and being a little bit more intentional and thoughtful about how we organize the work that we're doing and with whom. So Marissa, you want to kind of talk about what we're talking about today?
Yeah, let's talk about it. All right, so on our agenda, we'll have our tech talk. We're going to talk about the technology, make sure that we have a strong foundation for understanding which tools to use. And then we're going to take it a little bit, take it back a step and talk about tips for virtual organization. So Microsoft has several options for file storage and sharing, and knowing that right tool makes it simple to find what you need and to share things with others. So of course, being cloud-based, you can update your files from anywhere, and you can share files inside and outside of your organization. So how do you know which tool to use? Here's a high-level overview of each file app, and we're going to start on the left. OneDrive for Business. This is your individual cloud storage. Think of it like your private share on a file server. Only you have access to this, and unless you intentionally share a file or a folder with someone, it stays private. You manage the permissions to those files. On the other side, I'm going to skip over Teams for a second. I'm going to take you over to the right with SharePoint. This is intended for team documents. That's document storage, document file sharing, all that stuff. Using SharePoint, you can create a structure that's similar to what you might be familiar with on a file server. So, where you have your departmental folders with varying levels of permissions. Teams comes in the middle as this collaborative workspace. It adds both OneDrive for Business and SharePoint into the same place so that you can essentially do your work without ever having to worry about what goes where. But there's some differences. So we're going to talk about them. We've got OneDrive for Business. That's that shareable private space. And before I get into this a little bit more, I want to play a quick game. And that game is, what should you use OneDrive for? We've got 4 options: short-term collaboration files, document drafts, all of your private files. Document drafts.
This is a poll on your screen, by the way.
Oh,
this is an interactive game.
Yes. So if you think about like short-term collaboration files, it's just something you're going to go quick back and forth for. Document drafts is like when I start a content outline for an event and I intend to share it in the future with all of the folks in events and marketing, I save it to my OneDrive first so that I would save it to my OneDrive first so that I can give you the answer before it's ready for your team to work on. So out of all of these, the answer is all of the above. So those private files that you work on will live in OneDrive forever unless you share them or you move them somewhere else. The message here, this fun little game, the message is OneDrive, use it as your personal drive instead of your computer hard drive or your file share on the server. You should always upload all of your work-related stuff here. We'll talk a little bit more about the things you don't want to save here in a couple of slides, preview to the future. But before we do that, I'd love to take you on kind of like a little demo to show you just exactly what we mean by having this private workspace. Before I do that, I did want to mention, in case you were familiar with before, that Microsoft had a limit for file sharing. They had a file size limit of 15 gigs. That's not great for organizations who work with bigger files like design files, CAD files. So that limit was actually increased. So the file limit size on an upload is now 100 gigs. So it's a even much more powerful tool than it was before. All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so I can take you guys to my actual desktop. While I do that, Dawn, are there any questions so far about OneDrive?
We do not have questions in the feed right now about OneDrive.
All right, cool. Then I'm going to take you guys into my actual OneDrive and give you a tour. Oh, these are reminders. All right, so here is the OneDrive in your browser. All right, and so in here, you'll have your files. So you see here, I've created a file structure and then all my files are neatly organized. I can come up here and I can actually add new folders, or I can create a document right from here to work in. This is actually going to use the Office apps that are included in the Microsoft 365 subscriptions. So it kind of it's this ecosystem and it all works together. The experience in OneDrive, it builds upon your ability to co-author and edit files as a team or, you know, in working on something in real time through those Office apps. So you can also upload right from here. If you're looking for the view of all of the items that have been shared with you, you can go to the share folder on the left and you'll see all of the folders and the files that have been shared with me. What's not here yet, but it might actually be in your Office 365 account and will be in everyone's by the end of, should be September, should be the ability to add a shortcut to a shared folder. So let's say Dawn has shared this folder with me. If I go over here for Marissa, there will be an option right here that says add a shortcut to your OneDrive, so that when I come over here, I can see that folder right in my kind of main view. It's not there for me now, so I can't show it, but it'll essentially be like right in between these two icons. You'll also be able to click here and be able to access it. While I'm here, I did want to mention that if you're used to using Windows Explorer or Windows File Explorer for navigating files, or simply put, accessing the files on your desktop, you can do that by syncing. So if I click this sync button, it's going to prompt OneDrive to open on my desktop. If you haven't run it before, you'll need to install it. But what happens at that point is I get the ability to choose what gets or synchronized to my computer. So here you'll see all of these different folders and files in OneDrive. It shows up here as my OneDrive folder on my in my Windows Explorer. From here, I can see things that right now my event planning folder is detecting some changes, so it's syncing. This little person right here is showing that it's shared with someone else. The cloud basically means it's not taking any, it's just a link to the folder in the cloud. It's not syncing any data. This green check mark is actually to let me know that the files are available. If I were to open the file, it downloads on my computer so that I have access to it in an offline state. If it were a green solid check mark, it means that I've said, please make sure that this folder or file is on my desktop at all times so that if I go offline, I still have access to it. So while you're connected to the internet, you can see that the files are constantly updating. When I'm offline, I'll have access to the most recent document. And then when I go back online, it'll sync up again. Now, if you want to share a document, it's super easy. I'll stay right here in the Windows Explorer. If you right click, there's an option to share. When you do that, it's going to open up this little window. It's the same window you're going to see in the browser experience. It's going to give you some options of who you can share with. You add in your name. You know, if I want to share this with Dawn, I can go ahead and share it with her. The other option is to just create a link, and you can copy the, maybe I'll get out of there. I copy, we'll try this. People at WorkSmart with the link, apply it. Now, if I hit copy link, it'll work this time. I can copy this and then just send it in a message to somebody, and they'll have permissions to do that. Kind of a neat little feature. Again, like I said, all the shared files are going to be in here. What I also didn't point out is the shared by me. So if you get a nice central pane of everything that's been shared with you. Something that I also find helpful, that while I have this open, I'll go ahead and share with you. If I go into an actual file, and let's say I want to be able to find files that have changed or the changes, I can go into these three dots that I could go down to version history, click on that, and I'll see all of the changes that have been made. Wow, I make a lot of changes to this one particular file. And then I can always click on these dots. These are like the dots to the future in Microsoft 365. If you ever see these, click on them because goodies lurk behind. I guess lurk isn't the right word. Lurk would suggest you don't want the goodies. So they're waiting in anticipation for you to click these dots so that you can get more things like restoring the file or just opening a copy of the file or deleting a version. We said this last week, and I just want to encourage everyone again. These features about version history and co-authoring and co-collaborating in a document have really made a lot of progress throughout Microsoft's life. And with Microsoft 365, they've invested a lot into the way you can share and co-author. And so a lot of these functionalities that may have been a little risky in the past are solid now because the goal is we work different in a modern workplace. So Microsoft's catching up with the times. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Oh wait, before I do, I did wanna show you a couple other things that I think is pretty cool. So if I go into a new email and I wanna share a file, I can actually just go into in Outlook, and I can go open my new message. I go to the attachments. If I wanna attach a file, I can actually, if it's stored in the cloud, I can click on it and I can say share it as a link. So this way I don't have to go to the document and click the share copy link and go to my email and do it there. I can actually craft my message right here and I can share it and it'll appear as a online document. Another thing that if you actually have an attachment that's already open, you can go into here on the message, you can hit upload, and this OneDrive option will actually allow you to store it. You'll see that it's saving. Once it's saved, it gives you that OneDrive blue cloud. If I go back into my OneDrive and I go back to files, there's an attachment folder. And in that attachments folder will be everything I've actually sent here, in theory. Let's see what happened to that file. We go here. Another little lesson. If I open the file and location, now that I've saved it, it'll actually take me to that file in OneDrive. Where did it put it? semantic file. Oh, it just dumped it right into the OneDrive. So, ta-da, it's there. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and take a second to see if there are any questions about what we've talked about so far.
So far, we do not have any questions in the queue. So while you are getting your screen reshared, I just want to reiterate, and we're going to kind of get into this a little bit more here in a second, but OneDrive is really your private workplace, your private sandbox. And yes, things can be shared from that when you choose to share them. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this here as we go along. But it's not really the best place for all of your team things, but it is the best place for all of your personal things. And I just gave you a little bit of a preview into the next question.
Very true. And it's a good point because if you try to share everything, store everything in OneDrive, you may come into some frustrations. Now, sharing internally and externally, again, we'll talk about that here in a second. But before we move on from this, I want to mention that sharing internally and externally is nearly the same. Sharing outside of the company means that they'll be prompted to confirm their email address, basically the email address you shared it to, and then they'll have to enter a code that is sent to their email. So there's some different authentication for opening a file, whereas if Dawn shares it with me, we work on the same organization within the same Microsoft Office 365 tenant, it knows that I'm safe. There's no additional authentication required. Now, your company or your team controls how you share with different people in the security settings. There's a couple of options. There's the no external sharing allowed, so it prevents any internal users from sharing any content externally. Then there's the authenticated option, which means you are allowed to share with users that you add to Azure Active Directory, which basically means if you've created them as a guest within your Office 365 tenant, then they can access it. There's also an option for only allowing sharing for people with your Microsoft 365 tenant or other Microsoft 365 tenants. So basically, if they have a work account with Office 365 or Microsoft 365, it means that you trust them. The other option is anonymous sharing, which basically means that your company can share with whomever they want. Now, I mentioned something about guest access, so I want to kind of touch on that. Guest access is basically allowing someone into your Microsoft 365 tenant on a limited scale. It's someone who isn't an employee, or if you're an education, a school, that if they're a student, basically if they're not a member of your organization, they can get limited access, and that's by design. There's no license required, but the idea is that we're restricting and really tightening control over who has access to what data. So if you're regularly working with someone, let's say it's a external vendor or it's a client, you can allow them access to use some of these tools. And Dawn mentioned something important. What should you not use OneDrive for? There should be.
I'm just launching the second. All right, so we're playing game number 2. I kind of already gave this away, just maybe a little bit. What should you not use OneDrive for? There's a couple of different options on your screen. You can take a second to make your guesses, and then we'll tell you what the right answer is.
I feel like tests in college should have been this easy.
So while that's being answered, Marissa, we had kind of a quick and easy question come in. that I feel like you can address while we're waiting on some folks to fill this out. Question was, um, if you upload a PDF, going back to when you demoed some stuff in OneDrive, and save a new version, does the version history follow that since it's a static document, or does it just show it as a new version being uploaded?
That is a great question. I don't have an answer to that. We can check it out.
So I can say, and again, we should confirm this for sure. But I can say that in my experience, when I have done something like that, as long as it's the exact same name, if I make sure that the name is the exact same, no V2, no different spaces or spellings, then it will, in my experience, show it as a new version as opposed to a new document. Again, we should probably confirm that. It's been a little while since I've done that, but if it's still working the same.
Yeah, it's a great question to stump us. In the past, I know that when you have uploaded things to OneDrive or SharePoint, you can replace documents just by going into the file itself, right-clicking, and then saying like update or upload new version. So there might be a couple of options, but homework for us to confirm.
Yeah, okay, so the correct answer, as it always is on tests and whatnot, is all of the above. If there's ever an all of the above or none of the above, generally that's going to be the right answer, at least in my experience as a part-time college student.
That's right.
So Marissa, you want to tell us why it's all of the above here?
Yeah, so OneDrive is really not a good place for collaboration. And long term, you know, it's great for sharing an individual file, collaborating on a little bit. But if you have a document that you need for a department and somebody leaves the organization, they had the permissions to control who shared what. And so when you are, let's say someone leaves the company. Here's a perfect example. When I took over the role as marketing manager back a year ago, the person whose role I was replacing was still in the role, and she had a lot of files in OneDrive. And so she was able to share a lot of that data with me, but she had to go in and share every folder. And then in order for me to control that data moving forward, we had to download it or move it to another place, because once we removed her account, all of those files would go with it because it's set at the account level. There's no umbrella permissions like you would have in like a file server. On a file server, you would be able to go in and, using the principle of least privilege, you would grant users permission where they needed it. So if, let's say, a perfect example is an HR folder. There are files that you want to share, like policies, like PTO forms, and there are things that you don't want to share, like people's home addresses and salary information. So you, if you share something in OneDrive, they have access to everything at that level. Whereas there are other tools to do this. I bet you knew that I was going to say that. All right, so this piece, Microsoft Teams, gives you the window into that collaborative workspace, whether it's for yourself, like we talked about with OneDrive, or SharePoint, which is the answer to the, okay, well, what do we do with team files if you're telling me OneDrive for Business isn't the right place for that? The answer is SharePoint. You, like I said before, it's the same experience as if you were in OneDrive for Business. So right-clicking on files and sharing it that way, co-authoring things in the Word or Office the Office apps like Word or Excel Online, you have that same experience. And when we talk about SharePoint, I'm not talking about it from a complex SharePoint experience as big intranets that might require designers. Teams makes it really accessible for us to get to these good organization tactics for our files, because Teams is actually hosting files in SharePoint when you create groups of people to work together in teams. And Dawn's gonna explain to you how Teams works. We're gonna lay a foundation of how Teams works so we can show you just how easy it is to work within Teams for file sharing through SharePoint.
Yeah, so you've probably heard me talk about the 3 tiers for Teams and how much I love talking about the 3 tiers for Teams. And Marissa and I have done some trainings and stuff on the 3 tiers for Teams. But this is kind of where file organization and file sharing starts when we start talking about OneDrive and SharePoint. So there was a question that came in that said something to the effect of kind of what Marissa was talking about already, but when a person leaves, what do you do with their OneDrive? What happens to their OneDrive? So I kind of want to like hit on that a little bit more. So as Marissa mentioned, OneDrive is not really the right place for a collaborative drive of all the documents you need for that one department. We've done it that way in the past, but there's a very important challenge for this. And that's kind of what happens when somebody leaves, right? So OneDrives are owned, OneDrive folders are owned by one account or one person, and sharing and editing is granted via that one person or one account. So if and when that person leaves, your administrator then has to copy and download their entire drive as like a master folder, and then they have to re-upload it to somebody else as that person's like new folder. And from there, the permissions get really granular again, and you have to go in and you have to re-administer them all by file or folder by folder basis. And when that new host leaves, you then have to start all over again, and it's kind of a mess. So this is where sharing folder structures within Teams saves the day. The 3 tiers for Teams. All right, so let's go back to let's actually first tell you what the 3 tiers for Teams are. So number 1 is the team. So your team is your pre-designated group of people, and it's just an umbrella. No work happens within a team. There's absolutely nothing besides the title that is involved with the team other than like distributing who's a part of the team. Where the work happens is in the channel. So the channel is your topical workplace sandbox within the team. Collaboration happens here. So this is where your messaging back and forth goes, all the things. The tabs is the 3rd tier of Teams, and this is your bookmarked resources for that channel. And one of those tabs is the Files tab, and you guessed it, files here. This is where files lives within the 3 tiers of Teams. So if somebody's part of a team, they have access to all of the channels and all of the tabs, and subsequently all of the files that are within the team. So let's go back to kind of our HR example and somebody leaving the company. So let's say you have a department head who's leaving. And if that person was the host for their department's files within OneDrive, which they probably were, right? Because they're the department head. Then we know that when they leave and it was all stored in OneDrive, that leaves a little bit of a mess. But let's say they're using Teams, channel, and file tabs for organizing their department shared file structure instead. As Marissa mentioned, fun fact, this is actually hosted by SharePoint. When you create a channel, it automatically creates a folder in SharePoint that's named the Teams channel name, which is kind of cool. So this is sort of the easy peasy way to think about this. If a person is a member of a team, they automatically have access to all the channels in the team. And if they have access to all the channels, they have access to all of the files. And when they are not a part of that team anymore, they don't have access to those things automatically anymore. So, and again, the flip side is when you bring a new person onto the team, you no longer have to go out and redistribute access and permission to all of these different files at a granular level. So having your files stored and accessed in the 3 tiers of teams instead of in a OneDrive saves you a lot of time. It also makes it a lot easier to find. So, and again, as Marissa mentioned, you don't really want everyone to have access to all the things, right? So let's kind of break teams down into like a hierarchical all company view. So because not everyone needs access to everything or should have access to everything, you don't really want to store all of your editing files in the same place with all of your published files. So when you adopt teams for your company, you automatically get an all company-wide team with a general file or a general channel. But you can create all these different topical channels as well. So going back to the HR example, within your team, your all company, if you have files that you want to share out, like your employee handbook, this is the final version of this employee handbook, you would want to store this in your all company teams HR channel in their file tab. Now, what you don't want is to put the working editing file within there, right? Because then we could all just conveniently go in and edit that company handbook. That's probably not the best way to do that, right? So this is where you need to create a new team. So you create a team and give your HR department access to that team. They are now your audience. And then you create channels that are topical, or you could just use the general channel within that team to house all of these working design files. So here you have more structure, you have more organization, you have the right people getting the right things all in one convenient little window. And you don't have people getting access to the editing version of different files that you don't want them to, but you do have people who are needing access to those files getting it automatically. And you have easy permissions and all the things. It solves a lot of different problems. So I realize I just said a lot of different things, and I see that there's a couple of different questions coming in. Marissa, anything we should talk about here?
No, just a request for a live example, which we will. Here in a second, we wanted to lay the foundation so that when we take you into Teams to see the files and how they interact, you have a little bit of a background before we throw you in. All right. See, and then the other one is just a repeat of the first question. All right, so before we take you into the Teams demo, there's another part of Teams that's important to be aware of, and it's this private conversations. So you can have chats that are not public. And I say private conversations because it's not just restricted to who is, like a one-on-one. Obviously, Dawn and I, that's a private chat. But you can also have a group conversation that's private. And these files are stored in your OneDrive for Business folder in the Files tab at the top of the chat. So it's in a very similar location in Teams. Again, here, the main difference is this privacy. It's this open versus closed. You, the user, set the permissions of who has access to something. So to echo Dawn's point, this is not ideal for storage. It's more appropriate for like bursts of sharing. But of course, take it all with a grain of salt, because whatever works best for your organization, you will discover as you get into using Teams more. And also, don't forget, we have an upcoming training on using Teams. We will dive way more deep into different aspects of Teams. So head to the Event Center and register for that. Now I'm going to show this to you in kind of a little neat map way to kind of summarize what we've talked about so far about where files live within Teams. We've got our channel on the left. This is, again, those are the intended Teams Teams sharing points or workspaces, and that's powered by SharePoint. So when you create a channel, you get a bucket folder for that channel. So in the WorkSmart All team, we've created a marketing channel. In that marketing channel, I will be able, within that folder, I will be able to create subfolders so that I can make sure everything is organized. If I attach a file into a post to share, it will end up in the bucket folder. And then I can manually move it to a subfolder. But if I upload directly to the Files tab, it's going to go into the folder I intended to. Now, on the opposite side, that chat or that private conversation, whether it's one-on-one or group, in the Files tab, there's not a lot of functionality here. Surprise! If you attach a file, regardless of where you put it, in that chat, it's going to go into the bucket for that chat. There's no folder options. You can't create subfolders, making it another reason why you wouldn't want to do long-term collaboration and file storage in something you can't organize. But if you do want to get to a place in your OneDrive where you can see all of this, there is a Microsoft Teams chat file folder that you can see. And now the moment you've all been waiting for, the demo. Let's see, let me get you to my Teams. Dawn, while I'm switching, are there any questions or anything you want to emphasize before we show it off?
So we did have one question come in from a little while back. So can you speak a little bit about the difference between a personal OneDrive and a company OneDrive?
Absolutely. So personal OneDrive uses the OneDrive technology. OneDrive for Business is built a little bit different. They look the same, but the functionality is different based on how they integrate with the rest of Microsoft 365. So if you have a personal OneDrive and you're familiar with what that looks like, you'll get a similar experience, except more functionality in the OneDrive for Business app. They don't work together either. So if you download if you go into OneDrive, the OneDrive website, you log in, you won't see the same stuff as you would, or you won't even have access to it. You have to log into OneDrive for Business. They are two separate things. All right, let me now review Teams, or my family, and then Teams. My kids aren't that little anymore, so it's a nice reminder that they were once that little. All right, so here's Teams. So here you'll see this is my chat section. I'm in my chat with Dawn. Now, if I go into the Files section, you can see all of the files are dumped here. There's nothing at the top that says create folders or anything like that. It's all based on the actual file. So whether I do something here or in the chat piece, it'll come here. Now, if I go over into my team, so I'm in the left navigation now, in this little guy called Teams, you'll see all of the teams here. Now, if I open this, you'll see all of the channels. If I click on this WorkSmart All, it doesn't actually go anywhere. So you'll see here too. So if I click on WorkSmart Team, it doesn't go anywhere because it's that umbrella. The general is that general channel that gets created with every team. And then you can see we've added an events channel as well for all things event-related marketing. So if I go into the Files tab here, see, it looks very similar to the chat, but ta-da! Well, that was the most anticlimactic ta-da. Thank you, Internet.
Ta-da, it's loading.
It's here. Now that we're here, you'll see this bar up here that makes much more functionality present. You get your folders. You can see these are just the files that have been uploaded to the conversation or the posts section of Teams. And so they've just been kind of dumped here. Now I can manually move them, or I can actually just upload. As you can see, I can just upload directly here. I can pick the folder and pick where I want it to go. Just as we showed you with OneDrive, you can sync folders from the Teams side of things. So from SharePoint, you can take these and sync them to your desktop. It looks something similar. It'll look like this. You'll have different, it's not in your OneDrive section. It'll be under the WorkSmart Inc. section, or your company, your tenant section. And you'll see all of these. And the same thing right here. Again, this is that same experience, driving that consistency, easy to use and easy to find. You don't have to learn one set of language to use OneDrive for business and one set of language for SharePoint/Teams. Let's see. Another place that I'd like to show you about for files is in the left navigation pane. Again, if you click Files, you'll be able to see all of the recent files, all of your Microsoft Teams files that have been shared here, anything you've downloaded. But then the other piece that's pretty cool is this cloud storage. You can actually add cloud storage. So if you work with something like a share file or Box, and you want to be able to incorporate that into your Teams, again, it's that central hub for your everything work, the modern workplace, the window into the modern workplace. You can add it here as a file storage option. So as you can see, I have my OneDrive, but I also have my Google Drive as well, because one of our marketing vendors works in Google, so it's easy to communicate in their language. Another thing that I think is pretty cool to show you is this co-authoring files. So if I go take you back to the marketing team and I go into our event planning folder and I pick up, again, this is that everything, that ecosystem that works together. If I come in here and I click on a file, like a Word document, I can actually co-author this document right here. And I can, whether I open it, you have the option to open it in the desktop app. So especially for like Excel power users, there's some functionality in Exchange or Excel Online that just doesn't work. So you would have to open it in the desktop app. But for some basic editing and co-authoring and collaborating, this is a really nice feature. You can come in here. If I shared this document with Dawn, she can get in here at the same time. Since this is a team document, I don't need to share it with her. She already has those inherent permissions. She could come in, we can have a conversation right in line. So it's, we can talk about it and it's right next to the document. So it's clear. I can also do things like @ mentions. So if I hit the @ symbol, I can choose to notify Dawn or tag her in this conversation. And then of course I get the same features of having a conversation as I would in Teams and anywhere else. Again, join us for Teams for everyday people and to learn more about that feature. But yeah, so it's just there's a lot of options without even having to think about it, that this is SharePoint that I'm working in here, but when I switch over here, I'm working in OneDrive for Business. Any questions so far, Dawn?
I don't currently have any questions in the queue, I believe. I apologize
Okay.
if you lost something in the chat feed, but if you do have questions, feel free to send them in into that Q&A and we'll definitely address them. I think this sort of shows you how Teams leverages both SharePoint and OneDrive, and that they both serve different purposes, right? OneDrive, again, to reiterate, is amazing and awesome for that sort of like short-term collaboration, and as your personal storage house, your personal private workplace that is shareable. But it's not great long-term, and Teams almost doesn't even set it up for it to work that way or to encourage you to do it that way, right? When you're in a space that is intended for long-term collaboration, which are those channels, it automatically puts things into SharePoint for you. If you're in that like sort of communication land, which is chat, it automatically puts things into OneDrive for you. So I think I'm not sure if you said this or not, Marissa, but if you share a document in a chat, it's when you go into your OneDrive portal online, it's automatically going to show up in your shared folder, which is kind of cool. But again, you don't really have organizational capabilities there. So it's great for short-term stuff, not great for long-term stuff.
I had myself muted for a second. Glad I caught it. Otherwise, I would have carried on without anyone hearing me. All right, so using Microsoft 365 for all aspects of for content collaboration helps you keep that consistent experience. You can share internally and externally. You can, something we didn't talk about here, but is certainly valuable, is this automation with flow. So one action triggers another to help automate how you do work to do work better. So that is through Microsoft Flow. And there's a lot of templates that are already created so that you don't have to actually know how to build those types of triggers and actions. So it could be something as simple as save your email attachments all the time to a specific folder in OneDrive. Then there's also the security, the compliance, and the management aspect of Microsoft 365 that we all love because of how rich it is in Microsoft's infrastructure with the capabilities. And specifically when I talk about security, I like to mention this piece about adding more control over your data. It's an important point to remember as we move data out of our office environments and into the cloud. It's important to remember how we are controlling access to that data. We don't want to forget that keeping a tight control over that is important for our cybersecurity posture. So when you're collaborating outside of the organization, you can use tools like Azure Information Protection to label sensitive data so that can prompt additional security measures to protect without hindering flexibility. So for example, you can choose to allow someone to have access to the content for only 7 days, or you can mark content by adding watermarks and headers if you need to. The other thing that you can do when you so when you access files on the go, you want to be able to control that data across mobile devices. So enabling mobile application management through something like Intune will allow you to increase control over how people can use the OneDrive for Business app, the SharePoint, the Teams app, all of that. It means you can block actions like downloading files or taking screenshots of files in the apps. So this really helps solve the problem. If you've ever tried to roll out mobile device management, mobile application management solves the problem of users not wanting companies to manage their mobile devices entirely. So again, that idea of controlling your data as it increases the number of devices that access that data. So that's the tech talk. I'm gonna go real quickly through these tips for virtual organization because they mostly speak for themselves. Number one, don't store anything on your desktop. Seriously. If you had seen my desktop prior to this conversation, Dawn can attest to this, practice what I preach, not as I do. Don't store it on your desktop. Nobody can access those files, and then plus the risks of losing the files aren't great, is large. Don't do it. Also, don't rely on your downloads folder, which is also something I tend to do a lot, and I have to remember, and it's building this muscle. If I download something there, don't keep it there. Delete it or move it based on if you need to access it in the future. Build a structure based on the way you work. So if you work primarily as departments, great way to structure it. But if you work primarily on client accounts, by client, that's probably a better way for you to do it. So kind of think about it as defining the top level folders based on projects or clients, departments, and then think about, then from there, think about how you would go to look for files. Is it a draft? Is it a final copy? Do you want to be able to separate those? for if you work in format type a lot. So Dawn and I work a lot of working on a file in something like a Word document, then also we save document or images by the format that they are. So if you want to have a PDF folder versus a JPEG folder, always having a consistent naming structure will ensure that you can find things easy. When we're talking about virtual organization, we're talking about making things easy to find as well as it is to store. So all of this is to support that idea. Documenting your standards means that you're communicating that consistent expectation. Always helpful. Updating it regularly. So this isn't a set it and forget it type of a thing. It's important for us to evaluate what is working, what isn't working, and make sure we're constantly updating it. But then there's also update your files and folders regularly. Go in and see if something needs to be archived so that you're keeping everything fresh. And of course, back it up. Microsoft 365 does not have an inherent backup solution. Their position is, it is the organization's responsibility to protect your data. They worry about protecting their infrastructure from making any boo-boos that hurt your data. You are responsible for anything like accidental file deletion, malicious intentional deletion, ransomware. Those are all your responsibilities. So a third-party backup is critical in making sure that all of these pieces are connected. And it's also critical to remember that not all backup solutions are created equal. Some will only back up Exchange Online or OneDrive for Business, while there are other components of Office 365 like Planner and Office 365 groups that don't get backed up in those. So remember that. And this is the point where I say, Dawn, do we have any more questions?
Your face was just the best there for a second. That was Marissa's boom face. Dead. I got it. Yeah, there's a couple questions that came in. So the first one was, what is the best way to search for a document? And I will acknowledge or say something about that, and then Marissa, I'm sure, has things to add. But from my perspective, the best way to search for a document is actually to build this structure that we're talking about. So make the right organizational structure so it's easy for you and your team to find this information. Making sure that stuff is stored in the right place, where the right people have access to those things. And then going back to the tips that Marissa just said, naming things in a consistent way so that it's easy to find. And we can tell you where to go and search for a document, and I'm sure Marissa has things to say on that. But really the best way to keep everything nice and neat and organized is to have this nice and neat and organized system that supports the search process. So Marissa, you want to tell them about like where they should go?
Yeah, I always suggest starting in Teams because it does have access across the board. So if you start there, you'll be able to access files from a variety of places. If you also, if you know where you're looking for something, so if I know that I'm going to be looking for something event related, I can go into my OneDrive file explorer and just kind of click on the top most level folder and kind of start typing for the type of file. It'll pop up there. It'll search everything that's kind of under that umbrella. But Dawn, we can't emphasize that point enough that when you're naming files, when you're creating folders, you really need to think about it from that search perspective so that it makes it easy to do that searching. Great point, Dawn. Couldn't have said it better myself.
You said it fabulously.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so next question. If you invite an external guest to a team, do they have access to all the files in the channels?
Yes, so if you invite someone to the team, then they will have everything underneath that team. Now, some of the functionality is not there, so it is restricted, and we can talk more specifically offline about what that looks like. so that do you need to create a team that that addresses specific concerns if there's data you don't want them to see. It's really, you create the team, and the people within that team have the same permissions as everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have one last question in the feed, and we are kind of right at the end of time, but if you have extra questions, we're happy to stick around if you want to type them into the Q&A real quick. But so this last question is, if we haven't implemented Teams yet in the way that us here at WorkSmart have, how do we, as in WorkSmart here, typically suggest creating that and then training that company's users for how to use it?
Well, that is a great question, and it's actually really appropriate timing, because we just posted a blog earlier this week about quick rollout for Teams. So if you have not used Teams before, the first thing I recommend doing is creating it kind of a test or a pilot environment. So creating the structure based on feedback from key people through the organization, and then inviting those key people to work within it for kind of a test period so they can get the familiarity with it. Now, when we help folks roll out Teams, it's really based on the needs. We have some folks that need it with the phone system functionality because it is their phone system in addition to it being their collaborative hub. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. Some folks are happy to jump in, kind of bare and build a process around it. But if you need more insight, we have more than capable service delivery teams that are happy to, who are more familiar with the way that you work and can help you guide you through creating a phone or mimicking or mocking the structure you already have, putting it into Teams. And then, of course, we're always doing these webinars, and we have all these different resources, whether it's our blog or our knowledge center on our website or our social media posts. Our goal is to make sure you have the resources to do work easy, and that hopefully providing those resources to you will help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is actually a great transition into upcoming events. So that's all of the questions that I currently have in the queue, but if you have more, feel free to send them in. But join us next week. So Marissa was talking about how important it is to back up your data, even data that exists in the cloud, especially data that exists in the cloud. So next week, we're going to back it up to basics, and we're going to talk about the where, the when, the why, all of the things, all the basic things about backing up data in the cloud. So what are your options? How should you be doing it? Stuff to that effect. Then the week after that, we're going to take a little bit of a break from the technology piece, and we're going to kind of talk about some of the softer skills side of the modern workplace. And we're bringing back our friend Becky Jacobs, who's the CEO of Simple Change, and she's going to lead a discussion with us about leading culture. So there's a lot of stuff happening in the world right now, and how do you navigate that and lead through that? I'm excited for that conversation, actually. And then the following week, we have Teams for Everyday People, and this is where Marissa does her dance break. And it's just part one of our Microsoft Teams training. We're going to start with some stuff on meetings and video calls, and then if you join us again the following week, we're going to break stuff down a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of to-dos and tasks. Again, the 3 tiers for Teams. You'll get a little bit more of an overview and a demo of those 3 tiers again, and all of the things that are possible, especially with tabs. There's a lot of things that you can do with tabs. And then we're going to shift gears and talk about cybersecurity. We're actually going to do a security training for your users that we're very excited about. And then we got a couple other things, and then that's the end of the series. It's kind of crazy. I think we might be almost halfway through. Maybe not.
I'm still adjusting to the fact that it's almost, or it is August. Is it August? It's August.
It's August, right? I
We're
know.
here.
Oh man. Yeah, time is just weird right now. Cool. Alrighty. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Tomorrow you will get a recording of this. You're also going to get a little printout that you can kind of distribute amongst your team members. And it'll likely be virtual and hopefully in that company all channel for your teams. And it'll have some cool tips for people to reference about file storage. So join us there. And I believe that's it. Yep. Okay. I saw a message come in, but it was just a thanks. So thank you all. Have a great day. We'll see you next week.
Happy Thursday. See you all.